Guten Tag und willkommen zu dem nächsten Video in der Serie Grammatik Wiederholung. Heute spreche ich über die Vergangenheitsformen Präteritum und Perfekt. So auf English, simple past is Präteritum and present perfect is what we call the Perfekt. Okay, so we're starting with the Präteritum, or the simple past. The reason it's called the simple past is because it really just involves one word. You're taking the verb itself and just putting it into a past tense form. This is what we use most of the time in English, but in German, it's typically used more in writing. So normalerweise nur beim Schreiben, nicht beim Sprechen. So when people talk, they use the present perfect or the conversational past. Now, there are a few verbs, though, that even in spoken German are still pretty much only used or primarily used in the simple past. And those are haben, sein, and the modals. So for haben, to say I had, would be ich hatte. Sein, to say I was, would be ich war. And then your modal verbs as well. So ich musste, ich wollte, ich konnte, ich durfte, ich mochte, und so weiter. So when you're taking a verb and you're wanting to put it into the simple past, if it's a weak verb, so a verb that doesn't have stem changes or irregularities, then it's just going to take these schwache Verbendungen here, weak verb endings. So te, test, te, ten, tet, ten. You'll notice it looks a lot like our est ten ten that we put on our present tense verbs, but it's kind of like a te has been added in front of it. But watch out for this RZS form. It does not have a T ending. That's a common mistake by learners coming into German and thinking that it's following full S1010. So examples, Beispiele sind, ich kochte die Soße. I cooked the sauce. Du legtest dich ins Bett. You laid down in bed. Hatte keine Zeit. He had no time. Und wir mussten arbeiten. We had to work. So take note that hatte and our modal verbs follow these same weak verb endings, even though technically they do have stem changes and some irregularities. So starke Verbendungen, for our strong verbs, we're going to be taking the same as the modified S1010 that we learned for our present tense modal verbs, which is interesting. So basically it's S1010, except the ich and the RZS don't have any endings at all. So the strong verbs, another thing to watch out for in the past tense is that they usually have a stem vowel change, ein Vokalwechsel. So Beispiele, sah sie und winkte. He saw her and, notice this one right here, waved. This is using our schwache Verbendungen because it's a weak verb. Du lasest das Buch. You read the book. Ich ging in den Laden. Ihr wart zu spät. So I went to the store and y'all were too late. So the tougher thing about Präteritum when it comes to the strong verbs, the endings are pretty easy, but just knowing what the stem changes are is something you just have to learn whenever you learn a new verb. Now there are some exceptions, gemischte Verben, mixed verbs, that don't exactly follow all of the different rules that I just went over for strong versus weak verbs. These, even though they have a stem change, so you would think they're strong, they take our weak verb endings. And they actually do it in Präteritum, as you see here, the second form given each time, but they also do it when it comes to our rules that we're going to get to about making a past participle. So brennen becomes brannte and then gebrannt, and so on. So take a look over those. The ones that we use most often are probably wissen, to know, kennen is to be familiar with, denken, to think, definitely haben, definitely bringen. Those are very common to make sure you're familiar with. So if you look at these Beispiele here, ich brachte den Salat, I brought the salad. Dachte, dass gut schmeckte. He thought that it tasted good. Look at schmeckte here being just a regular weak verb and having that weak verb past tense ending. Du nanntest mich Salatmeister. Und, so you called me the salad master. Und ich wusste aber, dass ich ihn bei Publix kaufte. So I knew that I had bought it at Publix. So just a little salad humor there. All right, moving on. So, wenn man über die Vergangenheit spricht, so when you're talking about the past, benutzt man das Perfekt. So in English we call it the present perfect because it uses a present tense helping verb, with a past participle to form the past tense. Now we do have this in English, we just don't use it all the time like they do in German. So we can say things like, I have seen her, I have been there, I have gone to the store, I have eaten that, I have tried. But we just don't usually say that. We usually just use the simple past. Whereas in German, with pretty much every verb except for haben, sein, and the modals, generally speaking, you're going to use perfekt. And interestingly enough, haben and sein are the two verbs that are going to be your helping verbs. Now in English, we just have as our helping verb and then a participle. But in German, you have the option of haben or sein to be. So with most verbs, haben is going to be your helping verb, which is nice because that means it's going to sound similar to when we're forming the perfect in English. But you use sein for verbs that show a change in location or condition and are intransitive. Intransitive means they're not taking a direct object. So some examples of verbs that would work with sein, verbs that are indicating a change in location or a change in state. Aufgestanden, stood up. Passiert, happened. It went from basically not having happened to having happened. That one's kind of an odd one, but it's a change of condition or change of state. Gegangen, went, or gone technically. Gejoggt, jogged. Gefallen, from fallen, like fallen. It has fallen, or es ist gefallen. Eingeschlafen, fallen asleep. Geblieben, stayed. This one is an Ausnahme, exception, but it's not an Ausnahme for the same reason over here. Geblieben has a star just because it's an Ausnahme, that it's not a change of state, it's not a change of condition, it's literally the opposite. Bleiben means to stay, but geblieben for some reason is ich bin geblieben, for I stayed, not ich habe geblieben. So that one's just kind of an odd exception. These other two with stars are going to be exceptions because you could use them either way if you have a direct object. Gelaufen is from laufen, to run. Gefahren would be from fahren, so this is driven. Geschwommen, swam. Geworden, become. Gewesen, this is like saying I have been, so gewesen would be been. Gerannt, run, and then geflogen, flown. So all of these, except for a couple little exceptions, denote a change in location or a change of state or of condition in some way, and for that reason they use sein as the helping verb instead. So don't worry, we're going to do some examples with these. So first off, before we get into the examples, let's look at how to actually make our past participles, das Partizip. So if you're schwache Verben, it's pretty easy. We just have ge, and then the verb stem, Verbstamm, and then the letter T. So Beispiele sind gekauft, so ich habe gekauft, I have bought. Gespielt, ich habe gespielt, I have played. Gekocht, ich habe gekocht, I have cooked. Gehabt, ich habe gehabt, I have had. Also take note, and haben has given us one of the examples here, but in addition to the weak verbs, our modals and our mixed verbs also are going to take these weak forms of the participle. If it's a strong verb, starke Verb, and remember these are verbs that have some sort of a stem change or irregularity, then generally they're going to form their participle with ge, the verb stem, which is often going to have a stem change, so oft mit Vokalwechsel, and then an en ending instead. So gehen becomes ich bin gegangen, I went. Gesehen, ich habe gesehen, I saw or I have seen. And then gegessen, ich habe gegessen, I have eaten. There's also, we need to watch out for how we will do this with our trennbar Verben, so our separable prefix verbs. If you have a separable prefix or trennbar prefix, separable prefix, then you're going to need to still keep that out front and put the ge right in front of the verb stem. So the verb part of this, if you took off that prefix, is going to look just like you would have gotten from one of these first two formulas. So schauen would be geschaut. So anschauen is angeschaut. Fahren becomes gefahren. So wegfahren becomes weggefahren. But watch out, because sometimes we get a little happy about putting those GEs in there and put them in on verbs that don't actually take them. There are some inseparable prefix verbs as well. All the verbs that start with these different inseparable prefixes that you see listed here, they cannot separate. And therefore a GE cannot butt up in between them and the verb stem, so they just don't get it at all. The other verbs that don't get it are verbs that end in "ieren." So they're just going to be the verb stem followed by a T if they're weak and an en if they're strong. So examples, besuchen would be ich habe besucht. Verstehen becomes ich habe verstanden. Studieren becomes ich habe studiert. Passieren, es ist passiert. Entscheiden, ich habe mich entschieden. Empfehlen, ich habe es empfohlen. Okay? All right, so the perfect sounds a little bit different when you use it with Modalverben. There's you can use it, but it's better to use Modalverben really just in the Präteritum and just in the simple past single word. If you are using the modal verb without an infinitive, just by itself, saying like he wanted it, hat es gewollt, there's only one main verb there, he wanted it, and so you can just do hat gewollt to split that up, and we don't have to move into the double infinitive we're going to see next. Du hast es gekonnt would be you could do it, or actually not you could do it even, but just you could it. It implies in German that you could do it. But since we have just one main verb there, we can easily say du hast gekonnt and follow those rules like we have for the other perfect formulations. But if you have the modal verb used with an infinitive, which is the way we usually use a modal verb, then you're going to wind up having haben as your helping verb, and then putting your other verbs, your modal verb and your other main verb that you're talking about, in the double infinitive construction at the end. So, du hast das Spiel schauen können. This would be, you have been able to watch the game. So my suggestion is to avoid this and just use your Modalverben in Präteritum. So let's look at a couple examples. We had to take the test on Monday. If you wanted to use Perfekt, would be wir haben die Prüfung am Montag schreiben müssen. So that's kind of a mouthful. But you could also just use Präteritum and say wir mussten die Prüfung am Montag schreiben. And that's a little easier because then you just have that modal verb conjugated in the past tense second and then your infinitive verb last, the way we're more comfortable using modal verbs. Let's look at this one. Y'all weren't allowed to buy it. Oh, I think I didn't finish this one. I did not. So y'all weren't allowed to buy it. I'll go ahead and fix it. Would be ihr habt es nicht kaufen dürfen, or ihr durftet es nicht kaufen. Oop, got a little missing letter in there. All right. The last thing I want to mention is the Pluscuamperfecto. So this is another form of the perfect, but it's implying that something's already happened even before another past tense event that we're mentioning. So in English, the difference between the present perfect and this, the past perfect, is instead of saying like it has happened, we're saying it had happened. So implying that it had already happened. So in German, all you have to do with this is instead of using haben or sein as your helping verb, you're going to use hatten or waren. And the same rules apply as to whether it's a form of hatten or waren that did when you were deciding between haben and sein. So I had already seen that TV show. Ich hatte die Fernsehsendung schon gesehen. If you were just saying I saw it, it'd be ich habe die Fernsehsendung gesehen. But bringing in that hatte implies that you had already seen it. He had already spent all his money. Hatte sein ganzes Geld schon ausgegeben. And then we had already traveled to Berlin, so we traveled to München. Wir waren schon nach Berlin gereist, also sind wir nach München gereist. Now notice here that I used sind, because this one, we traveled to München, that's not past perfect. We're not saying we had already done it, we're just saying we did it. So this is kind of showing a comparison between the Pluscuamperfecto, we had already traveled, and then just the perfect, we traveled. Okay, so pause the video, get out a piece of paper, so nehmen Sie ein Blatt Papier und schreiben Sie diese Sätze in Perfekt und in Präteritum. Then, once you've written these out in both forms, unpause and check your answers. Okay, here are the answers. So you'll notice with each of these that the perfect is given in the darker purple, and then the praeteritum is given in the lighter purple. Remember that when we're going through these, a lot of these, if you're speaking, you're going to be a lot more likely to use perfect, because that's the conversational past, the spoken past, but praeteritum you're going to see in writing. And then you're going to usually default to using praeteritum if it's haben, sein, or the modals. That's why, for instance, on this one right here, it's war nicht so gut. You could say ist nicht so gut gewesen. But generally speaking, most people just say war. Das ist das Ende. Danke fürs Zuschauen. Schauen Sie das nächste Video, Grammatik, Wiederholung, Wortstellung. Viel Glück beim Lernen!